Let's all turn off our cell phones. Mr. Guy? Hey. Hi. So when you're ready, sir?
We're ready.
Already past the start time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. Je m'appelle Steve Staples. Je suis la présidente de l'Institut Rideau. My name is Steve Staples. I'm the president of the Rideau Institute. I'm delighted to release this report today called Shared Vision or Myopia, the Politics of Perimeter and Border Security by Gar Pardy. I think that this report is an important wake-up call, and it's a clear call for greater public scrutiny of the proposed perimeter security deal that Prime Minister Harper and President Obama are negotiating now. These talks have not been very transparent, and I think that the implications now in the balance between security and privacy have become so great now that this must be part of the national discussion. That's why I'm delighted that when we asked former ambassador, foreign service officer, and CIA liaison for Canada for 4 years, Gar Pardy, to look at what was publicly available and to comment on this, and he's put his thoughts in this report today, which we are making available, and I think will be the topic of great discussion when Parliament comes back. So I'm going to turn this over to Gar Pardy now, and then we will have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning. Some of you who've been around Ottawa to know that the issue itself has been around, certainly probably a lot older. It's an older issue than I am, and that goes back a few decades. But in its current phase, of course, everything changed on 9/11, and at that point, I think within 2 weeks of that event, or 10 days of that event, the Prime Minister Chrétien of the day and Mr. Bush met, and they said, well, we've got to do something about the border, and that emerged, and Mr. Manley and Mr. Ridge were involved, and they created something called the Shared Border Accord. That didn't go anywhere. They even included the Mexicans at one point. And so today we have another version of the same effort. The words have changed, but essentially the objective is still the same. The key thing here, and I point out in terms of what has changed in the current iteration of this approach to trying to make the border an easier place for Canadians and for Americans for that matter, because the Americans have toughened the environment for their own people as well. But really what has changed in this effort is that historically Canada and the United States negotiated agreements, and really whether it dealt with fish or lumber or any of those kinds of issues, the agreement itself was self-sealing. The issue dealt only with the issue that was on the table. Here, we've got a desperate attempt, and I label this a desperate attempt by the Canadian government to try to do something by selling basically the privacy rights of Canadians to the Americans in order to get changes on the border. And that is a major change in this. Last time this ever happened in Canada-United States relations was 1854, and I note this fact there. And never again would we try to negotiate an agreement with the Americans in which, in effect, we gave them rights in an area different than what was on the table. And so I think for Canadians, and I think up until now, there's been very little discussion of the privacy issues that are involved and inherent in this approach. The idea here, I think, is to try to bring home to Canadians that you may get some easing of the border, and let me tell you, I would put the emphasis on you may get some. There's no guarantees in this. And from the way that I've read the agreement and the way the negotiations are going, basically we yield on privacy and on security issues, and then there's some hope that down the road there's going to be some easing on the borders here. And if something happens in the meantime, we may be locked into agreements on security that basically does not deliver on the trade side. So anyway, that's where we are. The report is there, and I hope that you take an opportunity to read it. It's not a long one, but in Ottawa terms, that is. So I leave it to you, and I'm open to any questions that you may want to ask.
Party.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, you're talking in broad strokes about privacy. Can you give concrete, specific concerns of examples of how Canadians would be forced to relinquish their privacy in this agreement? Obviously recognizing that transparency has been an issue.
Yeah. Well, this agreement, as you know, is we don't know what's going to be into the agreement at this point. All we have is essentially what the Prime Minister and the President agreed to last February in very broad strokes. What the details, and the devil here is really going to be into the details as to what they agree with. I give no assurance that this government is prepared in effect to be tight on privacy issues in terms of what it's prepared to yield to the Americans here. And it's more futuristic in that sense. But there are examples around from the recent past in which, in effect, the privacy rights of Canadians were abused. You can look at two commissions of inquiries back in the mid part of the decade here. Mayor Arar in particular, Mr. Al-Malki, El-Mati, and Nuruddin. And I give an example in the paper of a Mexican lady, because some of these same issues applied to the Mexicans as well, where a Mexican academic was flying from Monterrey in Mexico to, I think it was to Madrid, and the aircraft passed through American airspace or American controlled airspace, and her name came, or the Americans knew about her. They forced the aircraft to return to Mexico, and she was offloaded. So the examples are there. The Americans are not going to be soft on these issues. For them, security is still the center of all public policy in the United States.
Where do you think this sellout will be? I mean, you're saying that our privacy rights are in jeopardy, but besides the travel, the information for travel or flying into the States or flying over the States, where are we going to be jeopardizing more of those rights, Mr. Pardy?
I think the rights will be in terms of essentially, and again, I'm talking futuristic here, and without having that, whatever the agreement is going to be, and we won't know, I think, probably till the end of the month, or maybe not even then, because the President and the Prime Minister are scheduled to meet, I think, in the next few weeks, and I think one might see the final details on all of this. But I think what you're going to see here is an agreement in which, in effect, the Americans can ask information that's in Canadian data banks, and they're going to get it. And that's where the agreement, because they're not only talking about cooperation on security matters, they're talking about integration on security matters. And if you go back to 2001, in that aftermath here in Ottawa, there was an integration on security matters, and as a result of that, the kind of information that was given to the FBI by the RCMP with respect to Mr. Arar, that was integration. The information was never even assessed in Ottawa as to its validity. It was oversold to the Americans used it, and a Canadian citizen ended up a year in a Syrian jail. No.
Okay, I will ask you two questions again.
Sure.
First, some people will doubt about the veracity of what you are saying. Could you tell us in a nutshell who you are and or is your expertise in that?
Yeah, I've been in the public service for 42 years. 36 of those years I've been in the Foreign Service, and over those years I've spent an awful lot of time dealing with Canada-United States relations. I lived in Washington as part of the embassy there for 4 years, back when the last 2 years of Jimmy Carter's presidency and the first 2 years of Ronald Reagan. I still got a sore neck from trying to get around the differences that those two presidents made. And in one way or another, I've been involved in these issues. On the security side, of course, as Steve has mentioned, I was the liaison officer with the CIA down there for 4 years. That was one of my responsibilities in Washington. And in addition to that, in Ottawa, I've been involved with issues involving the RCMP from the time I joined the Foreign Service in 1967. I wrote the first set of terms of reference for the posting of RCMP officers into our embassies overseas. I was involved for 4 years with respect to the Air India investigations and then the subsequent inquiry and things like that. So throughout that whole period, this issue of information and the movement of information or personal information between countries has been a major aspect of my work throughout that period.
So you look as a competent man. My second question will be, why do you propose the negotiation of a separate treaty on the protection of personal information, and how that can be done fast?
Oh, it won't be done fast. I'm saying that it needs to be done in the recommendations that I make there. And if you go back and you look at the reports that both the Auditor General have made over the years, the reports of the Privacy Commissioner, the recommendations of 3 commissions of inquiries with respect to the handling of personal information by the Canadian government here, there's a long history of recommendations which iterate and emphasize the need for even us to do better than what we have right now. The Privacy Commissioner herself has been very articulate on this issue of coming up with this sort of thing. And the reason for a treaty is, for one reason, you can build into the treaty, hopefully, the safeguards that will be needed, not necessarily with respect to only the transfer of the information, but most importantly, the subsequent use of that information by the, in this case, of course, the American government. We have a little bit of that in existing treaties in terms of mutual legal assistance and with regards to legal matters, or criminal matters, I should say. And then we also have another agreement on customs matters. And those agreements are kind of weak, I think, in that area. They're fine, I think, for providing the arrangements for the transfer of the information. Where they're weak is protecting that information with respect to subsequent use.
A lot of Canadians here, their information could be at jeopardy. Would you mind just explaining what information the U.S. has access to now on regular Canadians and what additional information is going to be put at jeopardy with this perimeter deal?
I think the difference between what I anticipate will be the future and what we have right now is the scope of the transfer of the information. What the Americans are looking for, and it's not, and by the way, it's not only Canada that they're looking to for this kind of information. Other countries are in the same situation. What they're looking for is personal information that is covered essentially by the Privacy Act. And this is why one of the recommendations that I've made here, that any agreement with the Americans in this area should be reviewed not only by the Federal Privacy Commissioner, but by the Privacy Commissioners of all the provinces and the territories as well. So that, in effect, anything that is negotiated with the government is subject to review by these people who have been established to implement the law in this area. And up until now, that does not take place.
For my listeners, they hear information. It's a broad term. Can you explain, like, what is protected now that could be put in jeopardy, like SIM card number, medical records? What is the exact information of regular Canadians that could be put at jeopardy?
That's, again, looking to the future. You've summed it up very well. It could be open-ended in terms of what if the Americans decide that they want a piece of information about you that is not available to them, they can then, in effect, request it possibly under this kind of an agreement. If you remember, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a case in British Columbia where the BC medical authorities there made an arrangement for the storage of medical data with a organization in California. And there was no protection of that individual once it went south of the border, because the problem that you have is that under the Patriot Act of the United States government basically can seek any information that's within the purview of an American organization and use that information no matter what the source is. And the Patriot Act is still in existence. But medical information would be one, your daily activities, if you want to throw it into the thing, what have you been doing? And you look at the kind of information that the RCMP provided the Americans on Mayor Arar. I mean, there was, I think, 2 computer disks just absolutely loaded with the minutiae of his daily existence, even down to the point he was signed as a witness for the rental of an apartment here in Ottawa that the Americans got. That's the kind of detail that you're talking about here.
To the diplomatic implications